recent Israeli airstrikes too, killing 22 people, the 5 journalists. I can't play the footage on YouTube, but we've all seen it. All we're getting from the world, including from Arab leaders, all of Europe, the word that I'm so sick of is condemnation. All they give is condemnation. They condemn it, nothing else. This plays into the fact that they're just letting Israel go on free reign here, just to continue doing what it's doing, and ultimately nobody's actually putting in real effort to stop it.
I think, obviously, I think the number of journalists killed at this point is 273, if I'm not mistaken, as well as medical care workers, UN workers, civilians. As we've said, 83% of those killed in Gaza aren't even militants. This would include the journalists that have obviously been killed. However, this barbarity, and the reason why nobody's doing anything about it, is fundamentally because it's very much part and parcel of the overall structure of the way that the system is been set up. It's not meant to actually provide protections. It's not meant to actually serve human rights. It's not actually meant to, like I said, protect these Palestinians from the wrath of these kind of imperial machine as is Israel. And the reason I say that is because I've seen a lot of people come out since this happened, because it's been barbaric. We obviously saw it happen on live TV, and I've seen even people on Instagram or all these other social media platforms screaming in outrage. Where's the United Nations? Where's the ICJ? Where are all these institutions, the ICC, that are supposed to obviously be the advocates and protectorates of human rights? And unfortunately, the problem with this is that people don't actually fundamentally understand what international law is and how it operates and what it's meant to preserve. International law was actually created during the decolonization period as a means to protect private capital. International law is first property and capital over people. And the reason I say that, for example, is because there's something called, for example, the Hall Doctrine. And the Hall Doctrine references back to the US President Hall, who at the time during the decolonization process that was taking place globally, a lot of European and American companies had vested interest in preserving their control over the resources in the vast majority of countries that were now becoming newly independent throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. As we saw, for example, in Egypt, the nationalization of the Suez Canal, this became a major threat to Western imperialism. And a lot of these economies wanted to nationalize their infrastructure in order to prevent their exploitation that was occurring during the colonial periods. And the whole doctrine, as it's known, was actually advocated for by the EU, by the Anglo-American world, as a model by which essentially says, well, if you're going to protect your own resources, you're not allowed to do so. You have to provide as compensation, but that compensation has to meet the full market value that's classified on the international level, not at the local level, and you have to pay us in currencies that are the dollar or European currencies. Now, obviously, when you've got newly established, states that have just come out of colonialism, have just come out of being exploited, this is asking for too much. You want to receive compensation, and not at a level that's going to meet the local laws, the new laws of the newly established states, but no, at some sort of international level that is basically defined by these former colonial powers, these imperial powers, and therefore to export as much and extract as much money out of these poor states, therefore continuing the exploitation or coercing them to capitulate and maintain sort of their private corporate rights over their natural resources. And this whole doctrine, as it was called, it basically became codified into international law through bilateral investment treaties, BITs. And that is the hard law of international law. It's codified in international law through bilateral BITs, that this is kind of which protects the investors' interests abroad between treaties established between different countries, and is then reinforced by international courts such as the ISDS, which is the investment state dispute settlements, in order to protect the interests of private corporations and their profits at the expense of those local populations. Because just for perspective, when I say the ISDS, it's basically a court system that allows private investors to take states to court if countries try to protect their own human rights and provide labor laws and labor protections, because that's viewed as impeding on private capital's profits. So they have a right to be taken to court at international level, codified international law, and they always win. And that goes to show people that the international legal system does not concern itself with people. It does not concern itself with human rights. And that's further verified by the fact that human rights, like even the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights that everybody refers to, it's not even hard law. There's no enforcement policy. It's soft law. Whereas legislation that focuses on protections of profit and cap and corporate interests, that's codified. There's an enforcement mechanism, and it's hard law. Whereas human rights, it's pretty much just guidance and principles. And I say that as somebody who studied this is exactly what my area of speciality has been. So people are outraged as to what's happening in Gaza. We're seeing the people being slaughtered. We're seeing these journalists being killed on live television, and nobody's doing anything about it. Fundamentally, because there is no real system in place to hold them accountable. It's all just talk. It's all symbolic. And the reason to have these international human rights institutions in the first place, as most is symbolic, is to give people the illusion that there's a system that's going to provide justice for them. But when you look at it in practice, it doesn't work. And Gaza is exposing that now to the world. Gaza is exposing the hypocrisy of a hierarchical international law system that is meant to preserve the richest, the most powerful corporations, and doesn't give a damn, forgive me, about human rights or the violations that are taking place around the world, and Gaza being at this point emblematic of all of that.
Yeah, and the Western democracies, the West holds all the power to stop this immediately. The West is enabling it ultimately. And as a democracy, those politicians that are elected should be voting to end arms with Israel. I don't, I'm sure that there are some shadow governments and whatnot, but for the most part, I think that those shadow governments would be bought out politicians and the lobbies that back them. So, are you saying when you say like the system is set up, the system can vote resolutions to stop at least within each country? It seems that money and the influence that the people around the politicians have is kind of what's creating this environment as well, correct? At least I know in the United States that's definitely what the case is with APAC and all of these foreign lobbies. I'm sure the intelligence agency also has its own agenda, but what I don't understand is why Western democracies aren't voting to change some of those things. It seems like it's because of their backers, the politicians' backers.
Well, there's a couple of things. So there is obviously, like I said, the unfortunate reality is that a lot of the political class are essentially compromised by the financial gains that they receive, whether it's through foreign lobbies or whether it's through even private corporations. Like I said, for example, the largest lobby group in the US, the largest by a significant mile, is actually the real estate lobby groups, which actually is it's actually the most powerful and the most influential, and then obviously including Silicon Valley and these tech companies. They also have a vested interest in what's happening globally. Oil companies who have made, for example, profits and are continuing to make profits by destabilizing oil markets, et cetera, and how that influences the profits that they're going to make and the value of their stocks and et cetera. So the problem is that unfortunately, the political class in the West and in the United States is compromised by the fact that the people behind the scenes who are running the show are actually those that belong to this financial and corporate class as well, and they have vested interests. And these corporations together accumulate more wealth and are basically own the entirety of the American state. And it's the same thing for the EU. I mean, the EU, the vast majority of its political class has vested interest in American capital. So again, you see how the main problem is like where the money lies and how the system works to basically preserve that. There isn't really this idea of democracy in the West that, of course, we have these political representatives and we vote for them and they're supposed to hold power accountable. But the fact of the matter is that, again, it's more so of an illusion. It's kind of there to placate people into believing that they actually have a say as to what happens behind the scenes. But the reality is that the vast majority, even senators, they have vested interest in huge corporations. They buy stocks. They have money invested in for example, Lockheed Martin. And so they're going to make money off of war. They're making money off of what's happening in Gaza right now. They're making money of even what's happening in Ukraine. So when their financial interests are linked to war, destruction, genocide, even the political class, and there's the issue of wealth, the revolving door, then obviously they're not going to be acting differently change legislation that works in order to profit a particular class, because the system has been made to maintain this degree, I guess, of control and subjugation of the rest of the working class public, or the public overall. And with regards to as well, like how can, even if they had come together, for example, and said, right, we're going to actually start banning and or imposing sanctions, etc., or banning Israeli goods and things along those lines. Again, you have an international legal structure through, the World Trade Organization, or like I said, through the ISDS, that would actually allow private corporations, even Israeli corporations, to take states to court and win. So again, what I'm talking about here is that there's this kind of dictatorship of like the wealthy that's taking place in all these private corporations, some of the world's largest multinational corporations, that are essentially compromising Western democracy. And in fact, Western democracy has been built by them in this kind of format to preserve their interests. And just like one small last thing I wanted to say, just for perspective, since the 2000s onwards, we've even seen a change in the way that international legal structures work. Whereas before there was a focus even on bilateral agreements and between states, now we have something called multi-stakeholderism. And basically what that means is that it allows even the world's largest multinational corporations to come in and help make international law, because they're considered so large and so powerful that if you want to accomplish things like, for example, environmental related goals, etc., these corporations have to be part and parcel of it because of their power and influence. So this says something about the international structure and how problematic it is at its core, and why these politicians aren't really doing anything, because they can't do it. Either they can't, or either they've become completely compromised by many different actors.